isn't it? So today's service is really inspired by Adrienne Maree Brown, who is a Black feminist, doula, writer, activist, executive director, facilitator, artist, pleasure activist. And I wanted to give her the opportunity to introduce herself to you. So we're going to see a little video that explains a little bit about how she entered into this work of creating emergent strategy.
I'm Jemiah from Full Set Society. We had the opportunity to talk to Adrienne Maree Brown about a whole bunch of topics. In this first part, we're going to talk to you about their upbringing, as well as their work in facilitation and writing.
My name is Adrienne Maree Brown, and I'm a writer and a podcaster and a Virgo.
How did you come to this work? Systems, pleasure, liberation. Just tell us a little bit about you and your upbringing and your work.
I grew up, my father was in the military for 30 years, and that was a really defining feature of my childhood. I grew up moving roughly every 2 years or so, and I was born in El Paso, Texas. I lived in Germany, back in Texas, Germany, Kansas, Georgia, Pennsylvania, DC, New York, Marshall Islands, Japan, Detroit, Bay Area. Right. So, and those are places I lived, and inside of that, I was always traveling. So I think that a big part of the work for me is something around comparative humanity. Like, because I had traveled so much, I had seen that there were so many ways that humans were being, and not all of them were focused on exclusion and hierarchy and othering in a violent way. And that was really helpful for me, because I think a lot of people grew up inside of that as like, that's the only way to be. So first, it was the adaptation, moving all the time. Second was being exposed to many different ways of being a human and realizing that we had agency, we had choice over that. And then I got politicized in college, really. Like I started wanting to poke at the systems by the 6th grade. And in high school, I had a great journalism teacher who inspired me to really start to think critically and ask big questions and write. But it was college where I met people who had an analysis for the first time, who were like, capitalism is a racial construct, it's a problem, it's a violence, and it ties all these things together. And once you understand that, well, you're going to want to understand this piece around anti-Black racism. You're going to really want to understand what's happening with the environment. And it started to all, just as there are systems, there are analytical systems that help you to traverse this. And I think my work, since I started in that zone of feeling like, oh, I see more about why the world is the way it is. And it's not our nature. Like, I don't believe that it is in our nature to create conditions where a huge majority of us cannot have a quality life. I think that it actually is in our nature to develop systems of collaboration and collective living. So my work has been facilitation, and my work has been writing. And everything else I do kind of weaves into those places of trying to figure out facilitation. How do we make it easy for humans to come together and move big dreams, big ideas, big visions, big strategies in the world? And then writing, how do we cast the spells and tell the stories and change the narratives and imagine something different that we can live into?
And how has Octavia Butler been a part of that? Yes.
My tail wags whenever I hear her name.
Thank you. So here is what I think is so wonderful about emergent strategy. Adrienne Maree Brown actually has faith in us, but she also believes that we need to decondition ourselves from the types of violence many of us are conditioned into, and learn new systems, what she calls emergent strategies, that help us become and be a better person. So it's not just about the systematic change, it's about who we fundamentally are as beings in ourselves, in relation to each other, and in our relationship to this earth. So you could tell there's actually a deep spirituality, a deep morality, as well as a deep effectiveness to her work. And I think that's why I want to share it with you and why so many Unitarian Universalists are intrigued by her. And just as a little plug, she's going to be at GA this year. Adrienne Maree Brown acknowledges that she is in a lineage that was created by her ancestors and adopts mentors. And one of her mentors says, community building is to the collective what spiritual practice is to the individual. Community building is to the collective what spiritual practice is to the individual. So we need to think about that. If we think about spiritual practice as being good for our spirit, to our groundedness, to our ability to be thoughtful, wise, connected, community building helps us do all of that collectively. So this month, and actually next month, we're talking about collective action. And it's collective action, whether it's helping volunteer in our faith formation program, or singing together, or pushing for legislative change or a new county program. The important thing is that when we do that work, we're not doing it as a collection of siloed individuals, but rather as an interconnected community. There's a difference between a mass of siloed individuals and a truly collective community. And you could kind of see the power of the difference. So for instance, I really like to think about the Dreamers movement. Dreamers, the people who arrived here as kids from another country, but who do not have often legal status that allows them full participation and rights, they could have tried to fight for their individual ability to stay. And they could have even kind of in a, okay, we all show up in a mass organized way and read some bullet points, push for a legislative fix. But they didn't do that, actually. They really became a community. They listened to each other's stories. They showed up and encouraged each other. They cried when family members got deported. They knew who each other were. They spent time together, and they enjoyed each other's company, even when there wasn't a task that related to their immigration status at hand. And you know what happened then? When they didn't get recognized, when a fix wasn't provided in legislation, they cried together, and they looked in each other's faces, and they said, I love you so much, I'm not just packing up my bag and quitting. This was painful, but when we look at all that we accomplished together, a community that looks out for each other, maybe that is as important as anything that happens in Congress. And so they learned that actually becoming a collective, doing that community building is what created them to be sustainable and resilient and loving and passionate. So, how do we build such community? And this really, Adrienne Maree Brown has a lot of different suggestions for that, things to pay attention for, but I want to lift up 3. The first one, let's take a deep breath around it, is radical honesty. Yeah. And by radical honesty, she means no admissions, no white lies, no projections. You ask the questions that you really want answered, and you speak your truth, and you let the relationship, the authentic, real, unhidden relationship between two real people develop within that honesty. And you will find that you could be honest and kind, and honest and compassionate. Second piece of advice, she writes, is to acknowledge the dynamics and then keep growing. By which she means have an understanding, voice it when needed, about on the front end, not like later on, but like right up front. Just talk about how race and class, gender, ability, geographic histories, and other power dynamics exist between you. They're real, they shape the way you think, they inform how you act, and so we need to be honest about those too. And I love yes ands. And also remember that all of that are constructs, really meant to divide us. And so she writes, be in the complexity of living inside those constructs while evolving beyond them through relationship. When you're in a deep relationship of love and mutuality, compassion, and interdependence, you find how flat some of those constructs can be. And the last one I think is sort of funny, is, in its term, is relinquish Frankenstein. I love this because Frankenstein was written by a Unitarian. You could read into that if you choose to. Relinquish Frankenstein, which she says is, you are not creating people to be with or work with that are in some ways an idolization of the perfect parts of people that you've sort of evolved around the way. You are meeting people in their real, full lives, the lives that were behind them and the future that is ahead of them. Stop trying to make and fix others, and instead be curious about what has made them themselves. So when you are feeling mad or hurt or in discomfort, do you know what I like to say? Turn to wonder. Turn to curiosity. Now, that is how you build relationship. But all of these are practices, right? They're things we learn how to do. We don't do things without building up kind of a muscle strength, a spiritual muscle strength, a relational muscle to do it. So her suggestion is, with everything, but with this, start small. Find one person with whom you're going to practice this radical honesty, one person that you're just going to acknowledge all that construct that's perhaps getting in the way of relationship, and then grow through that, evolve beyond that in the relationship, and relinquish our desire to be the owners of Frankenstein. Let them be who they are. And I'll tell you, I know myself, and I think others too, we're willing to grow when we could tell that people really know us and appreciate us and see us and even love us a little, then we're willing to grow. We also need to trust. When you trust people, they become trustworthy. So trust. Trust that the people in the room are having the conversation they need to have. Trust that learning and growth are happening in the place that a person needs them to be, even if you think they might need something else. Move at the speed of trust. I don't know if you have noticed this, particularly in collective actions that have deep meaning, like constructing worship or trying to fight patriarchy or capitalism or racism. But when the work or the content proceeds ahead of relationship and trust, there's normally a fallout. And that fallout, oh, I hear the chuckles. Oh yeah, okay, you know this. So it either looks like the work just stalls and sits there awkwardly and people aren't doing the things, or you can't come to agreement, or the group breaks up either midstream or like right after completing that thing that they were like committed to doing. Or sometimes the content is compromised. You're like, this is just not as full-hearted and as transformative as we thought it would be. Or maybe somehow by deep competency and devotion, the content seemed good, but if people who were experiencing that class or presentation or rally or worship went up and talked to any of the people who created it, that those creators couldn't speak about their experience in any authentic way that didn't involve pain. That's what happens when you move faster than the speed of trust. So if our vision or end game isn't about a list of accomplishments, but rather about liberation or beloved community, we can't sacrifice community along the way. Dear ones, emergent strategies are for becoming and being better humans. Adrienne Maree Brown's emergent strategies are alive within our covenant and our community. Let us remember to function in the spirit of love. Let us have building the beloved community be what we are all about. Let us affirm that others are people that we want in our lives. Let us dwell together in the peace of curiosity or wonder about where someone has lived and what they have experienced that has led to who they are now. Let us dwell in the peace of not fixing, not calling out, not shaming, not excluding. If we want the beloved community, let's practice in the small ways the practices of that beloved community. I leave you to consider, where is there liberation in the ways we do collective action? Amen.